Welcome to Protagonists of Change. I'm Nicole Labadie, Director of Campus Ministry at the University of St. Thomas in Houston, Texas. Today I'm talking with Father Casey Cole, a Franciscan friar and Catholic priest, blogger at Breaking in the Habit, and author of 2 books called What Happens After Saying Yes to God and Let Go, 7 Stumbling Blocks to Christian Discipleship. Father Casey, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to talk with me this morning. So first things first, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, thank you, Nicole. It's great to be here. So you kind of wrapped up all the main points there. I guess I'll add that I also am an avid, used to be a baseball player. I love watching baseball and football. I'm from Pennsylvania and North Carolina. I joined the Friars right after college as I was a religious studies major and a poverty studies minor, which you would think would fit perfectly with the Friars, but I did both of those things not wanting to be a priest at all. And I think it was sort of the schooling that influenced me to go this direction. Met the Friars in college and was just moved by their humble nature, the way they served the lowest and the least, the way that they gave an answer for me of what the world needs. So it's been a great life. I have not regretted it even a day.
That's so beautiful. And very similar to myself. So I double majored in religious studies and social work. And then that led to, pursue further theological studies for ministry. But that's awesome that you were so inspired by the witness of the Franciscans that you encountered in college. What was that discernment process like for you?
It was not fun, as I imagine most people can imagine. I was always someone who was in a relationship. I felt that dating was a big part of my identity, that I was going to be married and have kids. And there were 2 girls in particular that could have been the one. And one of them I was dating while this seed was planted. And I thought, shoot, what am I going to do about this? And so the tearing is very difficult because you feel pulled in 2 directions. And what I had to come to realize was that there was no one right answer, that God would be pleased with me if I became a biological father and husband or a religious father. And I think that's something that people struggle to understand, is that there isn't one way to live discipleship, but the goal is to live discipleship. So how do we live for Jesus without thinking that there's only one way that God wants us to do it?
So true. So true. Thanks for saying yes to that call. What has your first few years in priesthood been like for you?
Well, I saw someone tweet the other day, someone in my seminary class, that they have been a priest longer in the pandemic than not in the pandemic. And so I realized that is now the case for me as well. It has
Whoa.
been a strange first year and a half of priesthood. I did get a few months in with, normalcy, but it has really thrown me into a loop in the ways that seminary really didn't prepare me for. And I know everyone complains about that, but most times seminary did prepare you, you just weren't paying attention. No one really prepared me for this. So it's been kind of thinking on your feet. It's been a lot of stepping back and reflecting. Praying has been really important. And so in some ways, I hope that it's a great foundation for the rest of my life, where we would normally just jump in and do. You'd be so busy. This has been almost boring at times, but there's something really fruitful about that as well.
I first stumbled upon Breaking in the Habit when I was preparing a resource list for first year college students on Catholic social teaching. This is sort of a mentor resource list for our freshman symposium, which sort of goes into Catholic social teaching. And you have a handful of episodes on that topic, but also so many others. You talk about the church, about faith, Q&A about religious life, music. I saw an episode about Mumford and Sons, mentioned Harry Potter. What inspired you to start Breaking in the Habit? And what's the goal of the YouTube channel?
Well, it started with a blog, and it started 3 weeks before I entered the Friars. I chose a life that not many people chose, and most of my friends had no idea what I was getting involved with. So they wanted constant updates. Hey, tell us what it's like. Tell us the real secrets, what happens behind closed doors. And it's like, well, I'm not going to send 50 emails a week. And so another friend of mine had started a blog, and I thought, well, that's a, elegant way of doing this. So I started by writing 2 or 3 posts a week, just what I was thinking, what I was feeling, the experiences I was having, all the things I was learning. And I never wanted it to be, at least not for the first couple of years, me coming off as an expert. I didn't want to teach people things because really I had very little theology. It wasn't about catechesis. It wasn't even really about evangelization. It was simply experiential. Here's what I learned today. Isn't this fascinating? And after about 4 or so years, I started with a road trip actually with another friar. He lived in California. He was moving to DC, asked if I would fly out with him and drive back with him. And I said, well, cool. Can we film it? I think that'd be fun. Friars on the road 2 by 2, and we'd stop at different houses along the way and show the way the friars lived. He wasn't really thrilled about it, but I did it anyway. And so we bought a camera and I started the channel. And then I had a camera and a channel. I thought, well, what do I do with this next? And it just kind of became an experiment for a year. I started recording some of the blog posts, showing little aspects of my life, and people were watching. I had more hits in 1 year on the YouTube channel than I did in 4 years on the blog. Believe it or not, people will watch things that they don't read. It's crazy. Yeah, that's not hard to believe. And then it kind of went from there. I just experimented for a year or so. And by 2017, the end of my second year, I kind of decided, is this going to be just a hobby I do on the side or a ministry? And it ended up being a ministry. I got funding and have really taken it seriously since then.
That's incredible. That's incredible. And it seems like such a natural expression of that desire and that passion that you have for sharing the things that you care about, like you named earlier. That's so cool to hear how that came about very organically.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think of myself as particularly naive. No one ever thinks they are, though. But I do think that I bring a pretty optimistic attitude to it, that there are just things in the world that are fantastic that I want to talk about. And I think people should know there's too much bad news in the world. So I think that that's helped my success a little bit, is that I'm just happy about the world and what God's doing in it.
Yeah, you can definitely see and hear your joy when you talk about any variety of topics. So what is you mentioned that you see the blog and the YouTube channel as a ministry. What is your like boots on the ground ministry? And how do you balance that time and discern the time spent with the people that you serve and then the people that you serve through technology?
Well, by boots on the ground, I assume you mean sandals on the ground. As people
Yes,
always comment in
exactly.
winter, where are your shoes? I'm like, folks, I'm in Georgia. It's like 60 degrees out, you
That's
know?
good. Yeah, no need
Yeah.
for boots there.
But it's an act of humility either way. But yeah, so my sandals on the ground, boots on the ground. I'm in Macon, Georgia. I work at a high school, Catholic high school, and an elementary school at a parish. I'm the chaplain at both. I also teach a senior class at the high school. This year it's advanced social justice. Next year it's going to be faith in the modern world. Very excited just to talk to young people about faith and get them discussing these sorts of things. It is weird in some ways balancing it, but it is a pandemic. So our in-person stuff is in many ways diminished. And so having an online ministry has really filled the voids. I've in the last year done a lot more than I ever did. And it's been great to have all the resources here. I already have a studio, I have a camera, I have the microphones, I've got the lighting, just spend more time with it. It is a little more difficult than it was before the pandemic. And so you do have to remember, and it's actually fairly easy to remember, that I didn't join this life to be on YouTube. Right now I'm technically talking to you, but I'm really just looking at a camera. I'm looking at a screen, and that's not the most fulfilling life to do for 24 hours a day. I
Yeah.
joined this life to be with the poor, to be with people who want to learn, to
Mhm.
listen to confessions and celebrate the sacraments. And so, as effective as some of this stuff is, I could never do this full time.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'd run out of things to talk about because it
Mhm.
is my life in the world. It's my life in fraternity. It's all the many struggles, honestly, of this world that give me the inspiration to do this. And so, finding a balance sometimes can be difficult because it's a demanding job, but it's also just really easy because I don't want to be doing this all the time.
Yeah, and you mentioned like that it's taken a different um, turn and been a little bit easier in COVID. I think for every like parish and ministry, we're rethinking the ways to effectively evangelize and like how we
Mm.
can continue to meet people where they are when we're at our own separate houses and not able to gather in person. That's actually how this podcast came about. We had never done a podcast before. We were like, we need to continue to reach people.
Yeah.
Um, what what tips or advice do you have for young people on sharing the faith through technology or through social media?
Yeah, what I often tell people is stick to what you know. And that's not to say don't take risks or do things that are outside your comfort zone. But I do mean don't pretend to be an expert when you're not an expert. We have enough of those
Mhm.
people in the religious world that are confusing people. I don't think that you need a PhD. I'm not saying it's necessarily credentialism that only the smartest can talk. But remember that you do have something to share, and so share that. Share your experience. Share the things that you've learned that you know you can talk about. If you are confused about something, that's perfectly fine. Say so. I don't think there's ever a problem saying I don't know, or avoiding a topic because you might muddy the waters.
Mhm.
There have certainly been times that I've seen that online, and sometimes I've been tempted to dip my toe in the water of things and realize, you know what? I'm not sure if I've thought about this as much. So that would be the first advice, which is, it sounds negative, but it's actually a very positive thing that you do know something, and people do need to know your story, your experience of faith. And in some ways, that might be more effective than mine. The silly dress I wear helps me in some ways. It opens a lot of doors, but it also closes some for others. I'm the elite. I'm the patriarchy. I'm whatever, to some people.
Mhm.
And so maybe the quote unquote average Catholic can be much more effective in changing hearts than me at times.
Mm. Yeah, points to the um, just the goodness to be found in different vocations for sure.
Mm,
And I appreciate so much what you said about the sort of the need for humility when it comes to sharing the faith or evangelizing. I also really appreciated that, like you naming that you don't have to be an expert in a topic to talk about your relationship with God,
yeah.
or questions that you're working through with the church. I think that's something that um, students say whenever they're preparing a retreat talk is, oh, well, I'm not a theology major, I can't give a talk. And we're like, no, like you have a relationship with God, just like
Yeah.
any other person of faith, you can talk about that and you can share that experience.
Honestly, I think experts are a turnoff to some people because they feel
Mm.
like they've got everything figured out. And if I don't have it figured out, maybe it comes off as a little domineering. Whereas there's something very beautiful about asking a question, saying, I'm really struggling with this. And I just want to share you. I don't have any answers. I just have some questions. Maybe other people can relate to that.
Yeah, definitely. Um, that's something that I really appreciate about your show. In particular, the way that you are not afraid to engage those hot button topics or those tough
Mm.
questions about the church, but you do so with just a genuine authenticity. Um, and one of the topics that you have a few videos on is ecclesiology, or the theology of the church. So, as someone who works for a Catholic university, Catholic identity is something that's at the forefront of a lot of our minds and certainly of our activities. How does this serve the mission of the university? What does Catholic identity mean to you?
Catholic identity. I think it has to start with Jesus Christ. And I think that is
Absolutely.
so obvious and yet so necessary. So often in our history, we've defined what it means to be Catholic based on what makes us different from other people. And you
Mm,
see this through the ecumenical councils. The things that we define are not necessarily the most important things. Sometimes they are, but sometimes there's simply a way to correct problems that they've seen in the world, correct heresies, to say
mm,
that we are not that. And that's true and that's necessary. But we could look to Trent in the Protestant Reformation. There were a lot of things that we had in common that were in fact much more important that Trent said nothing about because they didn't feel like they needed to say anything about. And I
right.
think that attitude can spill over to our world today, where we can say, well, I'm not Protestant, so therefore that's what I am. But no, what you are is a positive thing. It is a disciple of Christ. It is someone who lives the Beatitudes. It's someone who uh, engages in the corporal works of mercy. I think these are the essential things, those who evangelize. And yes, we have a culture, and I think culture is fantastic. And there are particular, even man made rules that are good. That's what religion is in some ways. It is, how do we take this spiritual deposit of faith that we've received and keep ourselves on the straight and narrow? Not every rule that we have as Catholics comes from God. Some of it is just the reflections of holy men and women to say, here's how we can make sure that we stay on the right path. Um, but the way we stay on the right path, those means are not God Himself. And sometimes I think we make idols out of that. Sometimes
Mm,
the rules that we have, the ways that we pray, the ways that we engage others, our identity markers, they can be the fullness of who we are. And that's a problem. And so I always push back whenever we put qualifiers in front of Catholic. I'm a progressive Catholic. I'm a traditional Catholic,
Mm.
except for, the particular rites. But even still, I'm a Roman Rite. I'm a Byzantine Rite. Those are helpful, but remember, our core identity is disciple of Christ.
Like many topics in theology, there's this tension that exists in the church between identity and relevance. So this is one that's felt very deeply, obviously, because the church is in the world, but not of it. So our identity, like you said, is in Christ, and the fullness of God's revelation through him. And at the same time, we're called to really engage the world, to communicate and to share that revelation in a way that people at different points in history, in different cultural contexts, can understand. What does it mean for the church to be relevant?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, balancing the particular and the universal.
Mm,
So despite what I just said about kind of the intra questions of the church, of how we define ourselves within the church, I think defining the church against the rest of the world, there is some really interesting points that we can make that are differences, that we can say we are this and not that. And that's really helpful. We don't want to be just like the rest of the world. It's why someone like myself and many in the church love the habit. It's very
mhm,
distinct and it's very different, and it says so much. It's more than just a sign, it's a symbol filled with meaning of, this is the way I live, here's what I believe, here's what I don't do. And I think Catholics, particularly today, and young people are reaching for these symbols, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that when we relativize everything and we say everyone's all the same, that's pretty uninspiring, and we
mm,
shouldn't be like the world, and we shouldn't be like everyone else. And so having identity markers like that can be really helpful for evangelization, because it says we stand for something. Our
mhm.
liturgy should be special. It should be distinct. It should have meaning beyond just, let's all get together and share our feelings. Well, we do that every other place. There should be an objective reality. There should be something that draws us out of ourselves. And so how we be relevant, it's a weird balance of, we want to speak to the world in ways that the world understands, but I think if we just speak the language of the world will just say, yeah, well, I found that somewhere else. There's something about saying, well, we're different, and
Mhm.
not in a pejorative sense, like you look how bad you are and point the finger, but in an inviting sense of, we're an inclusive difference. You can come and bring who you are. Sure, absolutely. That's the wonderful thing about our Catholic faith, is that we have many rites. We have many cultures, that we are the universal church, not the uniform church. And so if you're from a different country, different culture, different language, have different opinions about certain things, to some extent, we're all welcome. But there is this overarching identity that we can all play into that is different from what you're used to.
You named that, like you spoke about how the liturgy should be special and something
Mhm.
unique and something different, to where someone can go in and realize, okay, this is not of this world. Like this is communion with God. Um, One of the critiques that I hear a lot from young people today, is that the changes in the liturgy since Vatican II have sort of helped to contribute to a mass that's more of the world and less other, less uh, like in the like with the vernacular language, with different changes in music, that sort of thing, and that the response then should be to return to only a Latin mass,
Mhm.
or liturgy in a particular way. What are the ways that liturgy in particular has that distinction, that special quality to it? What are the ways that liturgy does that, while still recognizing the native language through which people pray?
Yeah, so I think it's great to have a language like Latin that is in some ways universal, that we can kind of standardize this in some ways. And so no matter where you are in the world, we can come together and have a way to pray. When I was in Mexico for a couple months, there were certain parts of the liturgy they still did in Latin. And it was great. I was like, oh my
Mhm.
gosh, I already know this, and I
Yeah.
didn't speak Spanish. The argument that I hear for some, that it should all be in Latin because we need a special language that no one speaks primarily, that God needs his own language, I'm a little more reticent about, because it's great. God can have his own language, but if I don't speak it, it means nothing. That there has to be something that speaks to my heart as well. And so again, it's that balancing of the universal, but also the particular. I want to be able to experience God as I know in my heart, that there are certain aspects of culture, certain aspects of language that are fundamentally important. And we should be okay in the Catholic Church, especially in the Catholic Church, to be in communion in our differences. I love linguistics. I love studying it. Even though I'm really bad at languages, I love learning how certain languages have ways to express things that my language doesn't, and how it represents a view of the world that I don't necessarily have. And I can only think that this makes our liturgy better, that you are able to be particular. And it does not take it away from me that you celebrate in Spanish or French or Swahili, and I celebrate in English. I think it makes our church better.
So there's a growing number of nuns in the church. And by this, I don't mean sisters, for those of you listening. NONES. So people who, when they go to a demographic survey, for the question about religious affiliation, they check the box of none. I know in particular, like, this number is increasing in recent years, not just for Catholics, but especially for Catholics, but also for just religion in general. What can the church do? And in particular, like, how can we make our core worship experience of liturgy something that engages those who might be disaffiliated with the church?
Yeah, I think I'd like to remind people that 75% of statistics are made up. That everything needs context, right? So that is, I think, a true statistic. As the number of nuns continues to increase, that is a reality we should not ignore. But I think it also needs the context of recognizing that the number of people who find spirituality to be important has sort of leveled off. It's not dropping at the same rate. And so while people may not be religious, may not have an affiliation to a church or to a synagogue, to a particular religion, they are asking deep questions, and they are wondering about the cosmos and about the origins of life and about morality and how we can be people of service. That's something particular among my generation. I know that service was very important, maybe above and against faith, but it is certainly something I saw even in my non-religious people, that my non-religious friends, that you wanted to go do something good for the world. And so while that's not the same thing, it should give us help in the way that we approach the solution, which is that we don't want to just say they're a depraved generation that don't care about anything and they're just going out and getting drunk and living debauchery lives.
Right.
There's something that is yearning in people. And so how do we tap into that? People who think that they're spiritual but not religious, great. Let's promote the spirituality. Let's encourage them, go deeper with these questions. And you know what? Once you find yourself coming to maybe some answers, well, here's a life that you can live to make sure you stick to that. And let's show the beauty of how religion is not antithetical to spirituality, but in fact is a way to do it together. So it's not all about you and your own quest, but it's something we do, and we support each other. And we have not only today's answers, but we have yesterday's answers. We've got the tradition of the church. So you don't even have to come up with it all yourself. So I think there's something to that of, they're not the same thing. Spirituality is still there. And I recognize this among my students who find religion to be man-made and it's abusing people and whatnot. And there's some truth to that, but that doesn't mean they're completely depraved. How do we build that up?
So we've talked a lot about worship, but at the end of the Mass, we're sent forth to go and to
Get
love
out
and
of
serve
here.
God and neighbor. Tell me a little bit more about that moment of the Mass for you, like as a priest, when you send people out. What is your hope and your prayer for them at that moment?
It's fascinating that what I'm about to say, because people don't expect a priest to ever say this, but my trouble working with young people sometimes is that they want to stay in the church forever. They want to live in the church, and I want to tell them, get the heck out of here. Like, it's so weird to be telling people to go away from the church. But the reality is it has to be, again, that both ends, that the liturgy is the source and summit, but it's not the only thing we do. It's the source and summit of our life that sends us out to live our normal lives so that we can bring Christ to the rest of the world and then bring some of the world back to the liturgy. It's this kind of ebb and flow back and forth. But if you never go to the world, then you miss the point. You become what Pope Francis talks about it with this kind of insular, sick church that never goes out. Instead, Jesus tells us to go out. Think about how many missions he sends the disciples on. The very last words, go and baptize in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, evangelizing all nations. There's something about going out and bringing that message of changing the world, of building the city of God, and then bringing some of the broken and battered and the weak and the sick back to the church so that it can be healed. If you just stay in the church, if you ignore that dismissal, then I'm not sure if you got the point of the church. It's sort of a give me the communion wafer, give me Jesus for myself, and I'm just going to sit here and selfishly hold on to him forever. That's not what our Christian life is about. And so, as strange as it sounds, I say take that go seriously, get out of here so that you have actually something to bring back to the church.
I want to close with some of the difficulties that people might experience in the
Fun.
going out. So I know in particular, like, I don't want to say debates, but there's a lot of conversations, or it's tempting when we go out and engage with others, of differing opinions, or maybe they have different preferences when it comes to liturgy, or different ideas about what it means to be church. What is the way forward in that? What is the role of us as a Catholic Christian disciple? How can we enter into those conversations well?
Yeah, so there's two kind of approaches to this, or two, I guess, ends to this. One is that we're evangelizing the rest of the world, and we've talked about that a little bit, and we can talk about how we offer something that the world doesn't have, and I think that's great. And there are certainly some enemies of the church outside the world we need to be wary of, and great. That is one thing that I think we talk about a lot. The thing I'm more interested in some ways more concerned about, is those debates we have within the church. I find that the enemies of the church, the most vocal ones, are often within the church. And if we think about the story of Jesus, it wasn't the atheists that were attacking Jesus. It wasn't the Romans, the pagans, the people of other faiths. It was his own brothers and sisters. It was those within the religious elite that were the biggest problem. And I think that's still the case today. You take one look at Twitter and you see these battles between Catholic priests and the clericalism and the condescension you see, and it's disgusting. Why would anyone want to join this church? There's room for debate, and there are certainly right and wrong answers in a lot of places. And I recognize that people are passionate about finding the truth, but you can't have truth if you also don't have love. And I know that sounds strange to people because, 2 + 2 = 4, whether I shout at you and swear at you or not. And that's facts, but truth is something different. Truth is meaning. And so if we're going to say that God is love, and if we're going to say that Jesus sent us out to love our enemies, and we want to share the gospel, and we do so with hate, then in fact, we're not sharing the truth. Our actions undermine who we are. And so if we want to get in debates and we want to evangelize, we want to change people's hearts, it begins with the way that we treat people. And so I always remind people that get in debates. Yeah, sure. Argue your case. Let's find the truth, but never stop being a Christian. Read the Beatitudes before you go and criticize anyone. Think about the corporal works of mercy and what Jesus calls us to do before you go and call someone a heretic. I think it's important to remember that um, who we are as Christians is the most effective way to evangelize. It's how we treat people, not necessarily what we say that people will remember. And so if you don't love your enemies, they're going to know this. They're going to know that you are treating them with disrespect, and so they're not going to listen to you. So enemies outside the church, inside the church, you have to love them. You have to start with a mutual respect. You have to start with being Christian. And I think things will take care of themselves from there. If you don't, then I think we're wasting our time.